Jesus teaches us in his parable today about humility. And in particular, he uses the example of the dinner that he's been invited to. Kind of rather audacious of him. He's going to challenge the scribes and the Pharisees as he's been invited into this wonderful banquet by using the parable of a banquet, which certainly probably would have made the host feel quite uneasy as the parable unfolds. Talking about choosing the place of honor and making sure that you don't choose the highest place in case you have to be humbled by being asked to move to a lower place. Pick the lower place so that you can be exalted, raised up by the host. Makes me think of a lot of the tables that I've sat at in my life. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. For some reason, our kitchen table only had 7 chairs. And so as the youngest, I had the stool. And it was this really ugly green vinyl stool, avocado green. It was really popular in the 1970s and earlier. And so when dinner came, I had to go drag my stool over to the table. Everybody else got a chair, but I had to sit on the stool. Not that I'm still carrying that wound around in my life these many, many years later. Especially now that I'm a bishop, I'm always given a place of honor. And that always makes me uncomfortable. I am not worthy. That was my response when I first got the phone call saying that I was named bishop. I am not worthy. I still feel unworthy of the calling that the Lord and the church has placed upon me. And yet, again, pretty much no matter where I go, they give me an assigned place, a place of honor, which makes me uneasy. Because we don't want to have a false sense of humility. We want it to be true. We want it to be really about recognizing our humanity in our humbleness, which means, at least for me, recognizing I am a sinner in need of God's mercy. That I need to constantly turn to the Lord and ask for help and grace to live as I am called to be his disciple. I recognize that even though I'm still, and I hope I always am, uneasy when they say, Bishop, come sit here, that I recognize it's not for me as a person, it's for my office that they want to recognize that place of honor. A true sense of humility I hope to always keep in my heart. Jesus uses this example of going to a wedding feast and being the guest that comes in and doesn't choose the place of honor, only asked to go to a lower place, but rather choosing the lower place so you could be raised up. And when I hear this parable, I remember one of the best wedding receptions that I have ever attended in my life. It's probably now over 10 years ago. I was actually, tell you the whole story, I was actually at a meeting for the National Federation of Priest Councils out in California when one of my high school friends called me with a strange request. He said, my boss is getting married and they need a priest. Would you be available? So we got the whole story, and I won't bore you with the whole story, but this was a couple who both were widowers, and they were in their late 50s when they were getting married. They thought they had everything arranged. They just had never confirmed with the parish they were getting which priest was going to do the wedding, and it turned out none of them were going to be available. And so at the last minute, about a month and a half before the wedding, they called the bench, and I came in to do the wedding. They were a wonderful couple, really just tremendously nice, kind, good people. And I met with them, then celebrated the wedding, and they pleaded with me to go to the reception. And so I went to this reception, and it turned out being one of the most amazing experiences of a wedding reception I've ever experienced. When we got into the venue, of course, everybody was milling about for the first hour of hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. But you know, when you go in and you find your little name plate, your name tag that assigns you to a table, when I found mine, I kind of thought it was strange because there were 3 different numbers on it. And I kind of thought, well, where am I supposed to sit? There's 3 completely different numbers on it. And that chatter began to go around the room as the cocktail hour was going on, because everybody had 3 different numbers on their name tag. And so when it came time to sit down for dinner, they announced that you were to go to the first number for the first course. And so everybody found their way to their first table for the salad. After the salad was done, they asked everybody to get up and go back to where the cocktails were for just a few minutes while the room was completely reset, tables were reset, and then for the main course, you went back to table number 2. And you sat with a completely different group of people. And then after the main course was finished, once again, we were invited to get up and vacate the room for just a few moments so that the tables could be reset, and you can now go to table number 3, the 3rd number on your card, and again sit with a completely different group of people for the dessert. And the amazing thing is that this couple had sat down and looked at the 100 or so guests that they had invited and found some way to make a connection for each of the people at the table in each time that they moved to a different table. For example, my first table, of course, was with my friend from high school. My second table, I knew nobody at the table, but there was somebody who was a Blackhawks fan like I am. And so we could talk hockey. And finally, at the 3rd table, I sat with the bride and groom. They themselves, for the first 2 courses, did not sit together as husband and wife. They sat at separate tables. And just because you might have been a guest with a husband and a wife or a kid, didn't mean you all sat together. But there was always a connection to be made at the table with somebody else. There was no main table. There was no head table. There was no place of honor. And there was no lowly place, because everybody was equal. And everybody was invited to discover how it is that they are connected to somebody else in the room when you sat and broke bread at table. Perhaps that's another parable way that we can encounter the gospel today. Because the Lord does not look for the great or the lowly, he looks for the equal. He doesn't expect us to do amazing things or to do horrible things. He expects us to live our faith. The Lord is constantly looking at us differently than you and I look at ourselves and one another. We want to build ourselves up by tearing others down. And the Lord says, no, don't exalt yourself, humble yourself. And let me exalt you when the time is right. Let me raise you up because of the life you live, a life of faith, a life of discipleship, a life of love, a life of mercy. Jesus constantly gives us a different view, one that is often far greater than our limited view as we look at the world today. If only we could incorporate more of the gospel into our hearts. If we could live more like Jesus. If we could do what the Lord asks of us, thinking back to the prophet Micah, what does God ask of us but to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God?